You never know who you're going to see.
I beat one guy one-on-one my whole career. It's timing. It's for the clinching goal to bring the trophy back.
What you're going to hear.
You got a lot of desperate people in the city. They're desperate because they don't have opportunity.
Or what they've got to say.
When you can take people inside of a crime, show them things they wouldn't normally see.
The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That's what you're going to hear on my podcast, Open Mike. Find it where you find your podcasts. Welcome to another episode of Open Mike. I'm Mike Morse here with Kevin Dietz. Good morning, Kevin.
Hey, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm actually great. How are you and the family surviving?
It was nice to get outside. We had some good weather and finally, and it felt really good to get outside. But I think everybody's itching to get back to work and get going.
Right. Well, we'll see what's happening with that in the coming days. I'm excited about this guest we have here today. I've been following his career for a long time. Mike Cox is a former Oakland County, Wayne County prosecutor, our attorney general for many, many years, and now he's in private practice in Livonia doing some good work for the citizens of the state of Michigan still, but now doing it on the plaintiff side, which, as you know, Kevin, makes me very happy. So let's welcome Mike to the show.
Hey, Mike, Kevin, how you guys doing?
Hey, Mike.
Good. Welcome to Open Mike. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. I like the name of the show.
And that's my dog. You know, when we do the home versions, you never know what you're going to hear. Jesse, come here. Oh, there's dogs walking by.
Yeah.
So, you know, Mike, I know you're working on some big stuff right now, but we thought before we dive into that, you've had a pretty interesting career, and I love. You know, you and I are roughly the same age, and I've been watching your career and following your career for many, many years since I've been out of law school. But why don't you let's take us from where you went to law school and give us a history of where you've been and what you've done, and then let's get into some of the good stuff you're doing these days. Sure.
I grew up over by Rouge Park on the west side, and went in the Marines. Out of the Marines, ironically, I got 2 degrees from U of M. Undergrad in law school, and then I always wanted to be a prosecutor. I always wanted to be a public servant, and so I couldn't get into Wayne County, Detroit. That's where I wanted to be. I got into Oakland County and had a great time for a year. And John O'Hare and Kim Worthy and a guy Rick Cunningham, who was a judge, were on my interview panel, and I got my dream job in 1990 in Wayne County. Spent 13 years there. I did child abuse, sexual assault cases for a while, and ultimately I ran all the homicide prosecutions in Wayne County under then prosecutor, now Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan. And in 2003, I was the last guy to beat Senator Gary Peters. Very, very close race, the closest race in 50 years in Michigan history, and had a great 8 years serving the people of Michigan. And since then, I've I had to jump in the private sector, something you've had to do for quite a while, Mike. And boy, what a shock that was. So, it's like really jumping into ice cold water, and you either had to sink or swim. And I'm still treading water. I'm trying to get the stroke that you have. Haven't got there yet, but it's worked out okay.
So you've been on your own for 8 years, did you say?
Yeah, 8 years. I went to a big firm at first. It was nice, but I was spoiled being my own boss. All 3 of us are our own bosses right now, and there's a lot of risks, but a lot of enjoyment. And so I struck off on my own, and now I have 6 lawyers and some support folks, and it's working out pretty well. It wasn't my, I ran for governor. That was my plan A. I didn't have any plan B. And, so first couple of years, quite frankly, I hated it, but I really enjoy it. And I've got to meet some great, individuals and represent some great folks. And sometimes I even get kind of like the little more scandalous people, and that can be fun. But right now I have 50 great clients who all went to U of M and did great things for U of M, and U of M seems to forget that. And I think that's maybe why you're having me on the show.
Yeah,
It-
Mike, what was it, before we get into what's happening in Ann Arbor, what was it like working at the Wayne County prosecutors when you were the head of homicide? We read like Wayne County has more cases than any county in the country. We know that the homicide rate's always been pretty high. What's that actually like from the inside? I've always wondered what that's like to be in that homicide unit.
It was a rush. I loved it. If you're a prosecutor, that's the place to be. I know it sounds odd to a lot of regular folks to like say, I love being the homicide unit, but realistically, Mike, much like Mike probably does right now, when your clients first come to you, they're hurting, they're in a bad spot, and your job is to help them get to a good spot. Homicides, it's usually family members, and you want to have them see the end of the line in justice and some sense of closure. And but I got to tell you, it was a rush. It was a lot of fun, a lot of trials. I had 14 high-strung people who would scream at me every day about what happened in court, and we loved it. And folks in Wayne County and Kim Worthy, they do a great job with very few assets, and they're all to be commended.
Yeah, we're a big fan. We've been watching what she's been doing with that victim integrity unit, or not the victim integrity unit, but the integrity unit, when she's monitoring, past prosecutions and things like that, and that's just pretty remarkable. I don't think I've met her, but she seems remarkable.
Well, I love her because she hired me. So she was on the panel. She wasn't a boss then, but she was on the panel that approved me. So I've been an admirer ever since.
What do you take? I know this is off topic, but what is your take on the integrity unit, looking at past prosecutions from her own office, and letting people out who she feels got a raw deal or shouldn't be in prison? What's your take on that?
I think it's the right thing to do. It absolutely is the right thing to do. It actually started, it wasn't called that then. When I was in charge of homicide, we looked at the first Innocence Project case in Wayne County, a guy, Eddie Joey Lloyd, who'd been in prison from the mid-'80s. So this was like 2002. And we eventually exonerated him. It was the right thing to do. Mike, as prosecutors, we want to get the bad guys, but we don't want to get the innocent folks. And, I worry sometimes that people think, if they, as a jury, everything's like TV, and I know prosecutors, they have a responsibility to fight for justice and do the right thing. Defense attorneys, criminal defense attorneys, have a different responsibility. Their responsibility is to advocate for the client. Prosecutors are a little bit different. They're the advocate for the system and make sure the system gets it right. And so this is just the outgrowth of that. And so again, I tip my hat to Kim Worthy. She's doing a fine job with limited resources, and I have a nephew who works there, and he's very proud of what he does, and I'm glad that he's there and doing the people's work.
Was it a big adjustment to move to Lansing to be the attorney general? Going from that rush of the homicide unit or the prosecutor's office to statewide and kind of protecting consumers for the entire state had to be a little different.
Well, here was the biggest adjustment, Kevin. It was like, you go to Frank Murphy Hall of Justice, and probably the same thing when Mike would go to court in Wayne County, Oakland County. You go up down the elevator with everyone, right? The judges get their own elevator, but the lawyers don't. So you go up there, and there's people with yesterday's weed on their breath, and and fights in the elevators, and then you get up there. It was a loud place, and I remember the first time I walked into the G. Menon Williams building in Lansing. It's 500 lawyers and support staff. And I walk in there, 6 stories, and you could have heard a pin drop. And that was the biggest adjustment. It was just like the hurly-burly, helter-skelter of a criminal court. And then just going to the more corporate commercial side of the AG's office. But it was really the same in this sense, which is you had a job that, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, to dig in and represent your clients, in that case, the state of Michigan, but also try and do it the right way. So when the state was wrong, to steer your clients to do the right thing. So it was very much akin to being a Wayne County prosecutor, albeit bigger. The great side benefit is I was all over the state in my little escort wagon, and met a lot of great people. People say, weren't you so happy to be out of politics? It's such a shitty job and everything. I said, no, I loved each and every day of, even when Kevin Dietz was chasing me, I loved it. So what does that tell you? So
those are fun days.
Yeah. So, there would be occasionally bad hours, or parts of the day, but yeah, every day was a good day by and large. And I met, and I still keep in touch with a lot of people I worked with. Not the elected folks, but like the people in the office, and we have great relationships and formed some lifelong friendships. And same time, I'm kind of happy now. I'm just kind of quiet, doing my thing, and so it was a good part of my life, and I thank God I had it.
So let's talk about your law firm. What kind of work have you been doing mostly for the last 8 years up until right now? What was your goal when you came out?
I wish my goal was to keep the lights on, right, and be able to make my mortgage. And so kind of grew from there. Like I said, I have 6 attorneys now. They're all long-time, 20-year plus folks. And Mike, I have a really nice niche. It's a blessing and a burden because people come to you. Half the people think if you're an attorney general, you're a politician, you don't know anything about the law. And thankfully, the other half think, well, if you're attorney general, you must know everything about everything.
Everything, yeah.
Yeah.
You're
so
a genius.
I try not to dissuade them of that. And so I get a really mixed bag. So I've had political cases, constitutional cases, election cases. Same time, I represent some of the big 3, Quicken. I represent folks in front of state entities, whether it's the DEQ or environmental, natural resources, or I do WARA. It's been a mixed bag, and it's been a lot of fun. And like I said, I've had some folks like I was very involved with a case in the Court of Appeals with the effort to build the Gordie Howe Bridge, except I was on the other side, I was representing the Maroon family.
So, and I didn't hear you say anything about criminal defense. It doesn't sound like you have much of.
I've done a little. I was trying to do some federal stuff, but it was like when I was a state prosecutor, we always used to bitch that the feds only charge the case where they have video and 5 confessions, and that's absolutely the case. They don't, it's different being a federal. Nothing against it. It's different between a federal prosecutor and a state prosecutor. Someone gets shot on the corner or someone robs the gas station. The people in the neighborhood say, "Go to the police, go to the prosecutor." In federal prosecution, people, there's not that same urgency, and so they can take their time and they get to build bigger and better cases. And so it just wasn't as fun, quite frankly. Interestingly enough, I found the civil world more fun. A lot of litigation, and part of it too is in many ways, lawyers after 30 years can get stale. Well, I'm kind of like a 7 or 8 year lawyer because on the civil side, it's all still pretty brand new to me. So it's scary, but it's still pretty brand new, and man, it's different things every day. So it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. So tell us, you're all over the news these days with these University of Michigan cases. How did this fall into your lap?
Luck, fate. It really grew out of a buddy. I was in the Marines, and then I went to, because I was kind of a screw up in high school. Then I went to U of M, and I'd wrestled in high school, so I would go to meets. And through that, I met a guy who was a wrestler from the 80s, and also some of his buddies were football players, and we just kept in touch over the years. And, sometimes socialized with our kids. And when this happened on February 19th, that Sunday paper where the Detroit News outed the U of M, who had been looking at this for the past year and a half and knew the real full extent of what Dr. Robert Anderson had been doing to athletes for decades. When that went on the front page of Sunday paper, I got calls the next day from buddies. And so they're my clients, and Mike, like you, every client is kind of like entrust their fate with you, and that's a big responsibility. But for these folks, at least the initial guys, they're my buddies. And so, so that makes me a little more animated, and it's fun again. It's kind of like when I was back being a prosecutor. It's really easy to identify the guys with the white hats and those with the black hats in this situation. And I'm sorry.
No, it's, I've just a few articles that I've read. I mean, this is a different type of case.
Right.
It's going to have a lot of challenges. The defendant, the main perpetrator defendant, is dead.
Right.
So take us back. What kind of doctor was he? How many years was he at the University of Michigan? What have you learned so far?
Sure. So September 1, 1966, when we were all young or not born, I was born. I don't know about you guys. He started at the University of Michigan. And for anyone who went to the University of Michigan, there's an urgent care. It's called the University Health Service, Student Health Services. He was hired in there. He was hired as an adjunct professor. In 68, Bump Elliott, who was a coach of U of M, it was his last year before Bo got there, brought him over to be a team physician. As in the fall of 68 was the first complaint against him. A student by the name of Gary Bailey was a gay student, and for whatever reason, Dr. Anderson cultivated. And I shouldn't say for whatever reason. His preference was males. He was gay, and he couldn't be out about that then. At any rate, he committed a sex act on him, and that young man bravely reported it, and it went nowhere. No one ever investigated it. In the 70s, he's now become the head of the University Health Service. With a couple doctors and the whole bureaucracy. He's also taking over on some of the teams, wrestling team, baseball team, track team. And in the guise of medical treatment, and Mike, I know you had a couple of the young Nassar ladies, he was much like Larry Nassar, that in the guise of medical treatment, he would commit sex acts. And the athletes couldn't really fully appreciate it. They thought it was odd or different, but it wasn't, let's say, like a Catholic priest having sex with an altar boy, or something where it was obviously sexual, but it was sexual for Dr. Anderson. And the U of M knew that. In fact, through the 70s, they had a number of complaints about him. 1975, a wrestler by the name of Tad DeLuca wrote a letter to his coach, 10-page letter, if you can imagine that, and to Don Canham, who was the athletic director. They took a scholarship away. Don Canham, who is a legend at the University of Michigan, he wouldn't reinstate it. And what happened, went up to the Board of Intercollegiate Athletics, which is a mix of students, professors, and athletic administrators. They overruled both the coach and Don Canham. So that tells you, in 75, U of M had a great idea about what was going on. More complaints. 79, they actually fired him. There's an elderly gentleman, Tom Easthope, who was a vice president over Dr. Anderson at the time. He got a series of complaints. He was new to U of M, and he knew, as he said, that Dr. Anderson was a big guy on campus. Nonetheless, a group of gay young men, including one of Mr. Easthope's own employees, told him that they had been abused. And so this is, I don't know what the number is, and Mike, as you know, we'll find out more in discovery how many complaints there were, but these are just the ones we've been able to find out through research at the Bentley Library, FOIA documents, and talking with my clients. And U of M, imagine this, they fire him in the fall of 1979 for being a sexual predator on young men. What happens then? A trainer told a police officer that at that point in time, Don Canham, the athletic director for the University of Michigan, one of the most powerful people at the university, quote unquote, worked out a deal to get him moved over to the athletic department full time. And so the same time they fire him, he somehow gets back in, and they move him over to the athletic department. And check this out. I don't know if you guys have read the complaints, but there's an annual report that the president gives out every year, publishes it, what happened good, what happened bad at the university, how many degrees. In that calendar year, 6 months later, they publish this, and they say he decided to resign from the University Health Services, and they praise him for his 11 years of outstanding leadership. Imagine that. Praise this man, knowing that he had preyed upon young men. And then they literally threw him from, I can't remember the right metaphor, but threw him into the briar patch, threw him to where he wanted to be. And for the next 23 years, all the way to 2003, he abused hundreds, perhaps a couple thousand young male athletes in the guise of healthcare. It's just a horrendous story. And it really is a gut check for what kind of institution is Michigan going to be. And this is really one of those gut checks. These moments.
It's kind of crazy, isn't it, Mike? Because you can see how a school would want to protect its reputation. They have a problem, and they say, "All right, let's keep this out of the media, or let's keep this quiet, or let's quietly get him to go away and protect our university's image as much as possible." But here, it seems like they saw this problem, and instead of sliding them out quietly, they brought it right back to the forefront.
It's amazing. It really is, Kevin. And you and I both went to Catholic high schools, and our kids go to Catholic schools. It's much like how the bishops handled the predatory priests, and it has no explanation. You could say it was the time, but that's no excuse, and it was absolutely abhorrent. It's a crime what he did, literally thousands of times. And U of M, what I find, there's really two cover-ups that happened. There's a cover-up that happened when Dr. Anderson was there. But there's a more recent cover-up by the current president administration. And that's one thing that really is shocking to me. And let me tell you about it. So as you both know, in February of 2018, just to give you a little time frame, in February 2018, Nassar sent it. Remember that 3 days on ESPN and CNN. Mm-hmm. The whole country is riveted. In May of 2018, MSU settles with the first 333 young ladies for $425 million. The following month, a OSU wrestler comes forward and says, "Our team decision abused me." And in fact, 300 OSU, Ohio State football players and wrestlers file hundreds of suits through the summer of 2018. And if you remember, Jim Jordan, who's very close to President Trump, was almost sucked up into that because he was part of the wrestling program. Then on July 18th of 2018, Ward Manuel, by all accounts, a very good man, a friend of many of my clients, the athletic director at U of M gets a letter from Mr. DeLuca, who wrote the letter 40 years before. And he says, "You need to know about this." And he recounts everything that happened with Dr. Anderson. And so Ward Manuel gives it to the Title IX office, gives it to the general counsel's office. And Kevin, literally 3 months later, November 5th of 2018, a cop briefs the general counsel's office, the lawyers for U of M, on the full breadth of that there was hundreds of victims, they had been fired, that there had been a cover-up, and that there was live witnesses. And what happens then? Crickets. Literally from November until the Detroit News outs U of M in February 19th of this year, really the highest, the Detroit News really reflected the highest calling of every reporter, I think, but they outed U of M's cover-up. And so to me, there's a whole lot of wrongs to go around here. Dr. Anderson, the administrators who let him do what he did for 3 decades, and the current administration as well for trying to cover that up, and now trying to re-victimize the victims of Dr. Anderson in court.
There's so much there to unpack, Mike.
Right.
I mean, my head is kind of spinning with questions.
Yeah.
So, well, you watched the Michigan State go through that, Mike, right? And the whole country's looking at this deal, and they're saying, "Oh my gosh, is this going to destroy the school forever?" I mean, this is millions of dollars, the reputation, all of this stuff. And in my mind, I'm thinking Michigan's got some group of small power brokers that are saying, "What are we going to do about our problem?" And and it seems like they said, "Oh, let's just maybe it'll go away somehow, or maybe no one will find out." It seems bizarre to me that they wouldn't think, at that point, at least when Nassar's going down, that they would say, we have to come clean on this, address
Right.
this, take care of it, and handle it. I mean, from a PR perspective, from a university's perspective, to move forward, I can't believe they missed that opportunity to come clean.
You're absolutely right. All across the Big Ten, there's been Jerry Sandusky. There's Ohio State with this Dr. Strauss. There's Larry Nassar in East Lansing. And what do? They stick their heads in the sand. They don't reach out to the athletes. They don't try to do any, sort of remunerative counseling. Nothing. It's incredibly tin ear. And what's interesting is after the Nassar case was settled, the endowment and the applications to Michigan State went up. Why? Because people had faith that, hey, MSU got it right. They understand this is one of those moments, a fork in the road. Are you going to do the right thing as an institution or the wrong thing? And students' applications and donors rewarded MSU. And I hope, we're out here beating the drum and we're fighting them in court. But I have faith that ultimately enough of the regions will get the message. Because if you think about some of those folks, there's Mark Bernstein, who along with Mike Morris and I had some of the Nassar cases. And there's Regent Paul Brown, who campaigned in 2018 saying that what happened in Nassar was a failure of the MSU board and that he would be about transparency. We had Denise Illich, who's a regent, who I know is a great person. She was part of not letting the university hire a coach who came from the Nassar era MSU staff. There's Paul Beam, who's a member of the Michigan Association of Justice, who spoke out about the right that every litigant should get the right to a jury trial. So I'm hoping ultimately, with COVID, I hate to say this, but I think COVID has really helped U of M out in this regard. It's sucked up so much of the media oxygen, that the media hasn't been able to focus on it. But we all know the question is going to come to Tom Brady. I mean, I watch ESPN right now. They ask him about how's it with Tampa Bay. What do you think of the draft? But pretty soon someone's going to be on him, and it's going to be a question they keep asking him. What happened when you were there? And do you stand with the victims? Same thing with Charles Woodson. And ultimately, the regents and President Sislet have to decide, where do we stand? Do we stand about suppressing people's rights to go to court? Do we stand about further cover-ups? Do we stand about trying to sweep everything under the rug by hiring a DC law firm to do a quote-unquote independent investigation? And I think it's going to be a real test of what kind of institution U of M wants to be.
So, Mike, you said you about 20 cases right now?
I actually up to 50 right now, Mike.
50?
So,
okay.
50.
And so you said hundreds. Are you assuming that there's hundreds because you have 50, and when you have 50, there's probably hundreds, if not more?
Well, two things. My clients have told me that, and they have friends who want to get involved. There's also some other lawyers, Michael Manley, who was involved in Nassar, and Mick Raywall, who was involved in the Nassar case, who say they each have 100 clients. They haven't filed suit yet. I expect they will. So I'm from what my clients tell me, and the indiscriminate nature and the cover-up, the indiscriminate nature of Dr. Anderson and the cover-up by U of M, it's safe to say there are hundreds.
No, well, yeah. I mean, I didn't have that other information. It sounds like it could be towards 1,000, if not more, because not everybody, as we know, comes forward.
Right.
Did any of these gentlemen? I mean, back then nobody was making police reports. I assume did any of them go to the police after this happened?
No, and Mike, you can imagine, because like in the Nassar case, Dr. Anderson took care of most of what they needed, right? So when he was engaging in those things that mentally for him were sexually charging, they just thought it was part of the medical treatment, the excessive genital groping, the prostate exam for an 18-year-old, which of course, we're all at an age now to know that wouldn't be the case. And a lot of it's also intimidation. He made remarks to some people. There was a couple of athletes that he actually ejaculated, and told them it was part of ensuring that their prostate was properly functioning. And it seems kind of ludicrous now, but you have to remember the 70s and the 80s. And I remember that time. I've lived through it. And I understand the, doctors and priests, like they were there, right? And who else, who else do you address with a name? Doctor and father, right? And maybe a rebbe or a rabbi. But everyone, I mean, they're cut apart, and our society was a lot different then. We were a lot more deferential, those figures, and you figure they knew what they were doing, and that's what happened here. And Dr. Anderson took advantage of that, and when U of M learned, they didn't step in to intervene. Instead, they kept him in place, and they kept ordering the athletes, if you want to get on the field, if you want to get on the mat, if you want to get on the ice, and you want to keep your scholarship, you got to go see this doctor to get cleared. And so he had that ability, that sway, that authority over them.
Some similarities with Nasser. I mean, totally.
Right.
So he worked for the U of M until 2003, you said?
Yeah, so 66 to 2003.
Wow. And then he died in 2008.
Died in 2008, yeah.
And none of this, he was never held accountable. There was never a criminal investigation. There was never a civil. Was he ever sued before your suits or?
No, he, in the 90s, but of course, none of the victims knew about this. There were some complaints to LARA, the Board of Medicine, which the university would have known about, but none of the students would have known about. But no, he was never sued, it really is a function of this abuse in the guise of medical treatment, and we read stories about it all the time, or not all, but you occasionally have a group of, especially OBGYNs, the doctors doing something, they don't quite appreciate it. And certainly for these young men, they didn't really appreciate that. They didn't really know what was going on, and they just accepted that whatever Dr. Anderson was doing. I had a client tell me, he goes, when I was there, the football team, we did everything 150%. We did more than I could ever imagine happen. We ran through to the end zone every single play in practice. He goes, this was odd, it hurt, but I just thought this was part of playing at the University of Michigan. And Mike, you probably had some clients in Nasser who thought that what Nasser did was just part of being a high-level would-be Olympic gymnast. And that's exactly the cover-up both Nasser and Anderson counted on.
I was thinking back to Penn State and the Sandusky case, and people talked about how too few people had too much power, whether it's the football coach or the president, and it just makes you wonder what happens when a complaint comes in, whether someone writes a letter or files a complaint. Does it just funnel to this one person who can make it all go away, or or after the Nasser thing, it makes me wonder, are there systems in place that when a complaint comes in, a lot of eyes get on it now, so that this kind of thing can't happen? Because that's what's so odd, I think, to the general public is how can this same violation be happening to hundreds of people, and yet it doesn't get out there? Whether an athlete tells their parent, and a parent says, "Hey, listen, you're at the university, you go do your job," or if they, or if the parent says, "Wait, is this right?" And I get it that you don't know what a doctor's supposed to be doing or not doing. It's like taking your car and it's like, "Hey, I just fix it," But it's really troubling to think that this many problems can happen at this many universities along these lines. That how do so few people have so much power?
Two things, Kevin, there. One is the fact that it was happening everywhere kind of tells you like it was a time and place in our society, and really the status of doctors, and doctors could take advantage of that. And unfortunately, a few of them did. But more recently about power, to me, like I say, to me, one of the most shocking things about my university, it's certainly shocking what was happening when I was a student there and I didn't know, to these then young men. But as shocking is the more recent behavior of President Slissel. Because think about this, on November 5th of 2018, a detective debriefs the general counsel's office about all the abuse. And a vice president who had fired Dr. Anderson, who thought he had left the campus, saying, oh, there must be hundreds of victims. And a number had been interviewed. That, on November 5th, that went right up to President Slissel, November 5th of 2018. And we heard nothing, crickets. To me, that is perhaps too much power in a couple of people's hands. No accountability. So to me, it's a lack of accountability decades ago and a lack of accountability right now. And that's really part of what my athletes are fighting. Their own naivete from years ago, not understanding what he was doing. Because if you remember, in our era, we didn't have good touches, bad touches. I mean, taught my kids that, but we didn't understand that. And so there's that piece, and then there's the what I say, two different cover-ups, which Dr. Anderson has benefited from both. But I hope ultimately, with litigation and the public starting to focus on this and asking questions of the university, that U of M wakes up and does the right thing, which MSU ultimately did. It took them a little while. There was a lot of fighting and angst, but ultimately MSU did the right thing. And as a Wolverine, who wants to think that I'm part of the leaders and the best, I hope my university gets back to that and does the right thing.
What do you say to the people? And I think one of the first responses was, "This is stale. This is too old.
Right.
The statute of limitations has run."
Right.
What are the issues you're facing here on this case?
Oh, and Mike, as you know, they filed motions to try and dismiss these claims. They file those motions even though they don't doubt that what happened to my clients happened to them. Because for the university, it's not really about the athletes. It's really about trying to lower the amount of money they have to pay out to atone for, dare I say, the sins of the university, the wrongs of the university. But there's a concept in Michigan law called fraudulent concealment. It's a statute that's been around for 70 years, which says whenever a civil party hides evidence of a claim, knowingly does so, that the statute of limitations doesn't start to run. And so really from the very first complaints in 1969, from Mr. Bailey, then a 19-year-old sophomore, saying that I was abused by Dr. Anderson, and they covered that up, and they hid that from all the students who go to the University Health Service. And then through the 70s with athletes reporting, in 1975, the wrestler, in 1976, one of my clients told his track coaches. In 79, there's actually a fight in the office of the University Health Service. And then, as we know, in 79, Dr. Anderson's fired. So every time a coach sent an athlete to be treated by Dr. Anderson, they're saying he's a good, ethical, competent doctor who will first do no harm to you, right? And every time they made that representation with their boss, the AD, or a vice president knowing that he was an abuser, that was fraudulently concealing the truth and allowing Dr. Anderson to fraudulently conceal what he was doing. For instance, he would tell these young men, I'm being thorough. That's why I'm putting my finger in your anus. He'd tell these young men when he would stroke their penis or testicle, saying, I'm checking for testicular cancer. Now, if you read about it on Wiki, you realize it's ridiculous, but they weren't doctors. And so it's like the fraudulent concealment by U of M and by Dr. Anderson tolls the running of the statute of limitations. And that's ultimately what's going to help us prevail here.
One of the real turning points at Michigan State, to my eye, was when the women sort of came together and felt empowered by coming forward and identifying themselves, standing together, putting a face out there for the victims.
Right.
Do you think that could happen in this case, or are men less likely to come forward because of some sort of stigma or concern in that area?
Well, as you know, Kevin, all my clients are John Does right now, which is permitted under the federal and state rules. They don't want to be the poster child for this. You know, a lot of them have sent their children as athletes to U of M and elsewhere. Others have played in the NFL and the NBA, and they have public personas. And some of them haven't told their family. It's a very hard thing to tell your children or your spouse about. So it clearly, I'll say for men of a certain age, which I put myself in as 58, I think men 40 and over, it is a very difficult situation, especially with, Nassar was heterosexual sex. This is same sex, which has its own layer of societal implications, right or wrong. But I think with time, if U of M keeps pushing, there will be men who will say, I have to stand up. If revealing my identity is necessary, then I will do it. I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope they don't try and push that. I certainly don't want to have any of my clients have to do that. But ultimately, U of M's wrongs will be righted, and they'll be righted in the courtroom. And they'll be righted in a way which U of M doesn't have full control over. And so to answer your question, it is different for men. These men are really struggling with it. The longer the fight goes on, I expect there'll be more people like Chuck Christian, who came out last week, and probably bigger, more well-known names. I mean, any U of M fan would know probably at least 20 of my 50 athletes. And God, I hope none of them have to out themselves, and I will do everything to protect that for their sake, but also for the sake of the university. You know, sex assault victims should be treated with respect and have some privacy. And the other side, if it's a college institution, ought to act respectfully. And U of M hasn't done that yet. We'll see if that changes.
Do you see this becoming a class?
There's one class finally hasn't really started yet. I don't know, Mike. I've been very purposeful. We've gotten complaints from non-athletes who went to the University Health Service not knowing that he was a predator. Oh. And if they had, they certainly wouldn't have gone there, and they were abused. But we made a purposeful decision, my partner in this, Dave Shea, with the Shea Law Firm, that to be true to our friends, because this really started off with our friends and it's friends of friends. Our 50 clients of all are friends of our original friends. You know, it's like concentric circles. So we said we would just represent athletes. But it could grow into a class. But of course, we have direct actions, and we think that's the best course of action for our athletes.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying about Michigan stepping up. And I mean, this is going to be lengthy. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be embarrassing. I mean, and yeah, you're going to have your work cut out for you on this one too, because it sounds like, God knows what kind of records they have. God knows how they kept records back then,
right, and
what's still available. I mean, I'm just going through the discovery thoughts in my brain. This is going to be a lengthy, hard-fought battle, unless they, like you say, step up and take responsibility and set up a fund. And that took Michigan State. It took them a while, didn't it?
It did.
It wasn't overnight.
It wasn't overnight. And they probably want to figure out how many athletes are going to come forward. And so they're trying to probably figure that out. I'm sure in closed session, they've already set aside money as a board, because like I said, they've known about this. This has been coming for 18 months. But to your point about, one of the things about the fraudulent concealment claim is that we get a right to litigate that, Mike. So they file a motion to summary us, dismiss our case with statute of limitations. But under the doctrine of federal concealment in both state and federal court, we get a right to depose them about who knew what when. And that is not going to be a very easy process for the University of Michigan. They will not look good at all.
Yeah,
Have they made any announcements at all about any changes that they may have made to their processes for people coming forward, or maybe the whole Big Ten has, or maybe the NCAA has, but have they stepped up at all in that area?
No, they haven't, because like I said, they had swept all this under the rug until February 19th of this year. Amazingly, in 2020. They had known about all these. They had known that he was a predator and he had likely hundreds of victims, and they never let the victims know before the Detroit News outed them. So, short answer is they have not done anything different, and that's part of what our lawsuit's about. We're seeking injunctive relief. Part of it is we would like to have a better compliance plan. Best practices. Again, I would have assumed that U of M already had the best practices. But given the cover-up of the past year and a half, they obviously don't. And so part of our lawsuit isn't just about damages for the victims, the survivors, which it is, but it's also about reaching a corporate compliance program where this isn't repeated again. Because there's that old saying that those who don't know history are bound to repeat it, or something like that. And if U of M doesn't get its act together now, they will be bound to repeat it in some form or fashion. Maybe professors, and maybe a particular school, but they will certainly repeat it again if they don't get their act straight now.
It makes you wonder how many of these universities around this country have these dark secrets or these things in the attic that may or may not come out one day. The fact that this is 40 plus years, that there's hundreds and hundreds of people who were abused and it's never come out, and it took a newspaper article to bring it to light. My brain is just spinning because there's thousands of universities. Who knows how big of a issue this really was, and it's so close to us here with the. In Michigan, there are two biggest universities, and now you're saying Ohio State, and you're saying, not you're saying. Yeah, we know Penn State.
Absolutely. Penn State was a little different in this sense. Jerry Sandusky was clearly just a pedophile, right? So it was clear to the victims that they were sex acts that he was doing, and not in the guise of medical treatment like Ohio State, Michigan State, and U of M. So to your point, Mike, I'm not foolish or naive enough to think that it's just a Big Ten issue, right? I have to believe that there are sports programs all across the country from that era where presidents and athletic directors ought to be looking in-house right now and say, do we have this problem under our rug? And it'd probably be better to address it now instead of having to go through the turmoil that Michigan State and U of M have gone through in Ohio State.
Has there been any attempts for anybody to try to pass some legislation after these cases to make it mandatory reporting, public reporting?
There were some changes during the Nassar era. If you remember, the Michigan legislature was thinking about actually changing the statute of limitations completely, and then they took some steps. But
nothing passed. Mike, that didn't pass, did it?
A couple of minor things did. But to your point, I think at the time, the legislators thought MSU was just a one-off. Mm-hmm. But now we have OSU, Ohio State, right across our border. We now have U of M. So it clearly probably is time for the legislature. Again, now they're trying to figure out COVID and revenues and stuff. But when this dies down, which it will, and this summer, I think it will be time for the legislature again to rethink about these things, because people can, whine about lawyers making money off these things, but lawyers and reporters oftentimes are the ones who bring some sense of justice to these victims. And without the Detroit News, I may be sitting in my office, doing something totally different than what I'm doing today. I thank God for the Detroit News reporter, Kim Kozlowski. And thank God for lawyers in Nassar who kept pushing that. Sometimes it's easier to pick at the press and sometimes it's easier to pick at lawyers, but sometimes we get it right. And clearly Nassar and U of M are times when the press and the law profession is getting it right.
You talk about the ability for the press to bring a story open like this, and you talk about legislation being changed. I really think that Michigan has to look at how they treat the Freedom of Information Act. We are one of the toughest states in America to get information. We file Freedom of Information requests, and they get denied. And organizations and the government force the media to go to trial because they know to go to court because they know it's expensive. There's some states like Florida that are very open with public records, and there's some states like Michigan that are very, very tough to get that information. And thank goodness the newspapers in particular are very good at spending money on attorneys to get those records, those public records that allow you to find enough information or evidence to bring a story like this forward. And people talk about the press, which is fine, but it's important for all of the people to know that there's access to the public records, because that's essential to finding things like this.
Oh, absolutely. And Kevin, lawyers use the FOIA, and regular citizens use the FOIA. You know, I have neighbors when I lived in Redford who were very dropping FOIA requests all the time, but it's part of open government. Yeah, you're right. Michigan started off as being one of the most open in the 70s with its Freedom of Information Act. Now we have two gaping holes. The legislature and the governor's office aren't covered. When I was the Attorney General's office, you could FOIA anything from our office, and I'm sure Kevin did a number of times. But the governor's office and the legislature are not FOIAble. And why is that? Because you had to have the legislature to pass the legislation and to have the governor to sign the legislation. So they both exempted themselves in the 70s. But clearly, I think, to me, and no disrespect to the legislature, the most important first step for FOIA expansion would be for the governor's office, because so much happens there. You know, the governor and state government is like the mayor and local government. And it's so important to be able to get some sense of what's going on there. And so I agree with you, Kevin. The time is right for FOIA expansion. And quite frankly, it helps us. Some of the documents that we're using for our pleadings came from FOIA. And so it's a great tool for an open society. It improves everything.
I bet they charged you a bunch for those FOIAs too. They really run up the price on copying a public record. Yeah,
I wish I could pass those kind of copying costs along to my clients, but they wouldn't pay it.
It does get crazy. Well, Mike, this is a really interesting case. I appreciate you giving us
of course,
some insight into it. You have a long road ahead of you. I hope you'll come back on and give us some updates on how it's happening. Hopefully, you'll bring some justice to these men who clearly deserve it. So thank you for what you're doing and what you do. And it was nice talking to you today. And stay safe and keep washing your hands. And
I will.
We'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Kevin. And it's great being on Open Mic. And I appreciate it. You guys take care and stay safe.
You too. Bye-bye. All right, Kevin, that was quite interesting. I'm other than the headlines, I'm glad we got to dig a little deeper and find out what's going on with this case and the magnitude of it. I think Mike Cox is right that the media is so, concerned with COVID, as they should be, that very few other stories are getting covered in depth. And had COVID not been going on, I think the story about Dr. Anderson would be a much bigger deal. It'd be a Larry Nassar sized deal, opposed to which few headlines, I think.
Yeah, I think it will be if this continues to go forward. If it's not kicked out of court, if the university decides to take this thing to trial, I think it'll get every bit as big. And I do think, and I understand what Mike was saying about men not wanting to come forward, but I think they will. I think they'll see that it's a different time, and that coming forward is one of the ways that you do get change and demand change for everybody who's come behind you. And I'm really concerned what you guys were talking about. If you're a physician and are you driven to go to work at a place where it might be easier to victimize somebody? Is this going to be a big national problem across the country? There's a lot more to do here, and I think this case will elevate. As we start to move on from COVID.
Yeah, that was a good question you had about whether or not any of the men will release their names eventually, and if you do get one or two stars, he's saying that he has 20 athletes that we've all heard of their names. That would bring this to the next level. That might help, and maybe
Absolutely.
one of the guys will be courageous enough to say, "Hey, this was." I'm one of his victims. This is not nonsense, because athletes have instant credibility. They have credibility, and them just saying this happened, people believe it. And
it becomes such a different story when it goes from 50 victims or 100 victims or 1,000 victims to a face that you can relate to, and you say, wow, if this happened to him, what chance did all these other young kids have? And that's when I think the media finally understands it and gets better at telling the story where it's more relatable.
Well, let's sum up this episode of Open Mic with Mike Cox, who's representing at least 50 victims of Dr. Robert Anderson from the University of Michigan Health Services. We had an interesting conversation about that case and about the cases he is filing. If you like the episode, please share it, like it, subscribe to our podcast, Open Mic, and we will continue to produce some content for you out there on YouTube. And please continue to watch and share, and we appreciate your time today. Kevin, as always, thank you for being here, and we will talk again very soon.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.
You never know who you're going to see.
I beat one guy one-on-one my whole career. It's timing. It's for the clinching goal to bring the trophy back.
What you're going to hear.
You got a lot of desperate people in the city. They're desperate because they don't have opportunity.
Or what they've got to say.
When you can take people inside of a crime, show them things they wouldn't normally see.
The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That's what you're going to hear on my podcast, Open Mic. Find it where you find your podcasts.